They laughed at him. For the worn-down boots, the sun-faded cowboy hat, and a name no one cared to remember. Just an old man with empty pockets, lost in a sea of millionaires at America's most prestigious Mustang auction. But then, with a single raise of his hand, the room fell silent. No one expected that he, the man they once called trash, was the legend the horse world had forgotten. And the horse he chose was about to make the impossible happen. Late August. The sun spilled across the ancient pines of Jackson Valley, casting a warm, whiskey-colored glow over the Sutherland estate. The parking lot was packed with luxury vehicles, Mercedes, Range Rovers, with license plates from as far as Austin, Santa Fe, even Santa Barbara. It was the annual Mustang auction, the crown jewel of Western equine events, where millionaires, ranch owners, and horse investors came to throw fortunes at bloodlines they believed could outrun time. They dressed like they were walking a red carpet at some Highland Oscars, tailored cowboy suits, silk gowns embroidered with gold thread, expensive boots catching the soft gleam of string lights hung around the ring. Aged whiskey poured straight from oak barrels. Laughter rose in bursts after every boast of money and mares, thickening the air with that exclusive kind of arrogance known only to those who never fail. But weaving through all that gloss, a different figure moved slowly toward the auction pen. Jedediah McCrae, or Jed as they used to call him, wore a sun-faded cowboy hat, dust-stained high boots, and a leather jacket worn thin at the shoulders. In his hand was a plain wooden cane, but nothing about his posture spoke of weakness. He didn't walk like a man out of place. He walked like someone who had stood on every stone in that arena before, just not for a long, long time. The murmurs started as he passed the crowd. Who let Grandpa out of the home? Did he walk in straight from the dump? Probably a driver for hire, ha! Jed said nothing. He walked the length of the holding pens, pausing at each stall to touch the wood, breathe in the scent of hay, and observe the Mustangs, groomed, shiny, majestic. His gaze was sharp, unwavering. The steel-blue eyes that once read a horse's gait from 100 yards still held their fire. Then the air changed. Out came a gleaming chestnut Mustang, tall, broad-shouldered with a mane like raw silk. The arena held its breath. Applause, gasps. "This is Buckshot," the handler called out. A wild Mustang freshly broken from the Red Desert Range. Strong lineage, exceptional speed, verified beyond spec. Starting bid, $80,000. A paddle shot up from the VIP row, a CEO from Denver. Then a ranch owner from Utah, a Texas mining magnate doubled the offer. In seconds, the price soared past $150,000. And then a hand went up. From the very back row. Jed. Gasps rippled through the crowd, not at the amount, but at who had bid. A burst of laughter erupted, no longer masked by politeness. A young man with slicked hair, a tailored sheepskin jacket, Ryder Van Holt, heir to Van Holt Capital and master of Ravenhold Ranch, stood and laughed aloud. "Ladies and gentlemen, looks like someone's bidding with food stamps." Roars of laughter. Some clinked whiskey glasses like they were watching a farce. Jed said nothing. He reached into the inside pocket of his old coat and pulled out a crumpled envelope. Inside was a handwritten check, signed in bold ink, Jedediah McCrae. The amount would make an average rancher sell half their land. Carl Strickland, the auctioneer, no stranger to power players, stared at the signature and froze. His jaw slackened as he read the name aloud. Buckshot. Officially sold to Mr. Baseball, Jedediah McCrae. The silence spread like fire on dry grass. Laughter died. Glasses were set down. Eyes turned toward Jed, as if a ghost had walked in from the grave. Ryder frowned, hissed, "McCrae? No way. It can't be that McCrae." Cecil Branner, a grizzled investor and former trainer with over 30 years in the game, nodded slowly. "That's him. The man who trained Whiskey Saint. The horse that broke 3 federal records nobody's touched since." A woman gasped, "I thought he was dead." He wasn't. Jed hadn't died. He'd just disappeared. The same day Whiskey Saint was bought by a billionaire, and his only son died in a mysterious riding accident. Jed stepped into the ring where Buckshot was being held by 2 handlers. The horse snorted, eyes sharp as razors, muscles twitching under its coat. Jed didn't speak. He laid a hand on the horse's neck. Buckshot went still. No whip, no bridle, no command. Just a breath. Just presence. The kind that only comes from someone who knows horses better than himself. Jed turned, and Buckshot followed, step for step, like a shadow. Ryder watched, his smirk faltering. He clenched his jaw and muttered, Horses, all so damn easy to fool. Cecil, under his breath, murmured to someone beside him. It's not the horse, kid. It's McCrae. Man's never given up. Just been waiting for the right horse to come back. Jed didn't raise his head, didn't wave, didn't wait for applause. He walked off with buckshot like a man retracing steps on a road he once chose to leave. And as twilight blanketed the Tetons, the name Jedediah McCrae, once buried, was whispered again, carried in the clink of glasses, the hush of pine, the hush of wind. A wind that carried with it both memory and warning. Legends don't die, they wait for the right moment to remind us they were real. The moon had climbed high above the Teton peaks, casting a pale, cold glow across the back lawn of Sutherland Estate. The crowd had thinned after the auction, but the air still buzzed with the shock of it all. An old man with nothing had walked into the lion's den and calmly claimed the most talked-about Mustang of the year. Jedediah McCrae stood alone by the wooden fence, one hand resting on Buckshot's neck. The horse still stared into the distance, as if unsure whether any of what had happened was real. The night wind carried the scent of damp pine and the dust left by expensive boots. Behind him a familiar voice rang out, sharp, loud, meant to be overheard. I thought you'd come back in a wheelchair, not on horseback. Jed turned. Ryder Van Holt stood there, white shirt perfectly fitted like it was sewn in Paris, a glass of bourbon in hand, his smirk dripping with mockery. Or maybe an ambulance, Ryder added with a shrug, would have suited your age better. Jed didn't respond. He simply ran his hand down Buckshot's nose, slow and calm, like no one else existed in that quiet dark. Ryder stepped forward, his grin twisting. I saw your little show. No bridle, no whip, just stares and nods. Cute. But you do realize these horses aren't trained for park strolls. They're trained to win. Is that so? Jed murmured, eyes never leaving Buckshot. I always thought horses were born to run, not to be forced. Run? Ryder laughed loudly. Your horse might run, but it won't beat Ravenhold, not in this life. Jed looked up at him, no fire, no challenge, just stone-solid certainty. Want to test that? The air shifted. A hush fell over those still lingering, the local reporters, auction staff, curious stragglers. Everyone turned. A race? Ryder raised a brow, then laughed. You're serious? 1 week from now, Jed said. A real race. Buckshot against Ravenhold. No bets. Just honor. Honor? Ryder burst out laughing. You think you've got honor left to lose? Jed tilted his head, stepping closer to the fence. I didn't come back for honor. I came to prove that some things can't be bought with money or bloodlines. You're insane, Ryder scoffed, but the smile was starting to fade. Maybe, Jed said, eyes flicking to Buckshot, but at least I still believe in my horse. The silence that followed was long, thick. Then Ryder raised his glass and tossed the last of his bourbon skyward. Fine, Mr. McCrae. 1 week, I'll show you what happens when a has-been starts dreaming again. Jed said nothing more. He gave Buckshot's lead a soft tug and walked off into the dark, like a wind ghosting across the earth. News of the challenge spread faster than cigarette smoke in a mountain bar. Within 2 hours, social media pages dedicated to Western racing, Mustang enthusiasts, and even regional news sites had the headline, Jed McCrae, trainer of Whiskey Saint, challenges Ryder Van Holt's undefeated champion. Some scoffed, the old man probably can't even climb on a saddle anymore. Others pulled up grainy footage from 20 years ago, of Whiskey Saint, of that silver-bearded man standing in the center ring, eyes like fire that could melt mountain frost. At a bar in downtown Jackson, 2 grizzled cowboys clinked beer bottles beside the fireplace. Told you he wasn't dead, one said. He was just waiting. The next morning, Jed drove his old pickup back to his ranch at the foot of Wind River. The wooden gate hung crooked on rusted hinges. The McCrae Ranch sign had lost most of its letters, swaying from a chain like a forgotten memory. Inside, yellowed grass, rusted tin roofing, and a weathered log house stood like it had been holding its breath for years. Jed said nothing as he unloaded Buckshot. The horse stepped down, hesitating, nostrils flaring as if sniffing for something familiar. This is home, Jed whispered, patting its neck. Not much, not clean, but it's where I lost everything. Buckshot didn't understand, but it didn't resist. It simply followed, calm and slow. No rope pulling it, just choice. That night, Ryder appeared on a local TV program, studio lights glinting off his slicked hair and ivory button-down. The host asked, What do you make of the challenge from someone who's been out of the game nearly 20 years? I think people should know the difference between a legend and a bedtime story, Ryder said, lifting his glass. Jed McRae was a name, sure, but that era's over. This world runs on results, on science, not on feelings and memories. Do you expect an easy win? I expect to win. Whether it's easy depends on whether his old bones can still handle a saddle. The studio laughed. Back at the ranch, Jed sat alone in the kitchen. He pulled an old photo from a drawer, him and his son Waylon, standing next to Whiskey Saint. Both of them smiling, unbroken by time. Waylon had died at 17, training for a state race on that very horse. They said he went too fast, but Jed knew he had been pressured. By investors, by expectations, and Jed, in a moment of weakness, hadn't stopped it. After the accident, Whiskey Saint was sold, and Jed vanished. The next morning, dew still clinging to grass, a small figure crept behind the fence. Millie Jean, his neighbor's kid from half a mile down, sat squatting behind some pines, sketchbook in hand. Braided hair, dusty cheeks, wide eyes glowing like lanterns in the woods. Jed saw her, but he didn't shoo her away. She sat still as a wild kitten, drawing Buckshot's movements in pencil. She loved horses, but her mom feared them, once broke ribs from a kick, and banned her from going near any ranch. Jed knew. He said nothing. Later, as he led Buckshot past the fence, he pretended not to see her. "If you want to learn to ride," he muttered, "bring carrots next time. Buckshot doesn't work for free." Millie jumped up, cheeks flushed, nodding hard. "Yes, sir. I'll bring a whole bunch." Jed chuckled, for the first time in years. Something in her, the gleam in her eyes, the pure hope, reminded him of Waylon as a boy. That evening, after Buckshot nailed his directional cues from Jed's hand signals, the old man signaled the horse to stay in the center of the corral, then stepped back 3 paces without a word. Buckshot didn't move, just watched. Jed raised his right hand and leaned left. The horse stepped forward, no bridle, no reins. Just trust. 1 lap, 2. Buckshot circled him like a moon orbits its planet. From the fence, Millie clapped softly, eyes shining. "You don't ride him," she whispered. "He rides your heart." Jed kept his eyes on the horse, then murmured, "I don't need a war horse. I need a partner." Buckshot walked over and bowed its head. Jed placed his palm on its forehead. In that moment, there was no wind, no past, no pain. Only the rhythm of 2 hearts the world had once cast aside. Dawn crept across Wind River Valley in a cold, damp light. Mist clung to the scattered fields like a heavy breath. Overhead, crows glided across the gray sky, their harsh cries sounding more like omens than calls. Jed stood in a patch of dirt near the barn, gripping a frayed rope in one hand. His canvas jacket was dusted from last night's chill. In front of him, Buckshot pawed at the earth, tossing his mane and snorting hard, muscles twitching like they were ready to tear through everything in sight. The horse still wasn't broken. Jed had made progress. He could feel the rhythm of its breath, had earned the flicker of its eye. But that fire, that untamed spark, still burned. It was the kind of wildness born not from rebellion but from the wilderness itself, from open lands that had never known fences or men. Jed didn't fit him with reins. He stood still, feet planted deep like roots, breathing in sync with the earth. Wind swept through his salt and pepper hair and etched deeper into the lines around his eyes. "I don't need you to submit," Jed murmured, his voice barely louder than the breeze. "I just need you to listen." Buckshot pinned his ears back. 1 step, 2, then suddenly reared up, hooves slicing the mist. Jed didn't flinch. A sharp toss of the head, and Buckshot turned and bolted. A flash of chestnut streaked through the fog like a flame tearing through smoke. Jed didn't chase. He simply watched. He let the horse run, let it choose, because only when a creature knows it's free will it decide whether it wants to return. Nearly 10 minutes passed. Then, from the edge of the tree line, Buckshot came back. Sweat shimmered along his darkened coat, mane tangled, chest heaving, but in his eyes something had changed. He stepped closer. No anger, no doubt. Jed didn't praise him, didn't pat his head. He just nodded once. "Good boy, now we start." For the next 3 days, Jed didn't leave the ranch. He cleared the back paddock, repaired fences, whittled down old posts, dug out training tools from the dusty barn, used tires, pull ropes, white flags, old feed buckets tied with cans, no high-tech gadgets, no apps. But these were the very tools that once shaped Whiskey Saint. Buckshot was allowed to roam. At first, his runs were wild, erratic. He fought the rope, darted left when signaled right. But over time, the resistance faded. His movements grew fluid, responding to Jed's gestures, his posture. No shouting, no whips, just eyes and body, language older than words. One afternoon, with the sun bleeding red across the yard, Buckshot, unprompted, matched Jed's pace, from a trot to a canter, then slowed when Jed did. Jed sat on the porch steps, gripping a battered water bottle. Sweat soaked his back. His shoulders stiff like stone. "You're getting there," he muttered. "But we're not there yet." Buckshot walked over without being called, touched his muzzle to Jed's shoulder, then stood beside him, still. Jed smiled. That feeling, how long had it been? That night, in the dim kitchen light, he pulled out a photo of Waylon, his only son, a boy who once rode better than his father ever could. The accident happened when Waylon was 17, training for the state race, on Whiskey Saint. They said he pushed too hard. Jed knew better. Investors had pressured him. They wanted the boy to ride before he was ready. And Jed, too tired, too uncertain, had stayed silent. After that day, Whiskey Saint was sold. Jed vanished. The next morning, mist still curling over the grass, a small figure crouched behind the fence. Millie Jean. She had her sketchpad again, squatting by a pine, braids messy, cheeks smudged with dirt. Her wide eyes gleamed like flashlight beams in the fog. Jed saw her, said nothing. She stayed still, drawing every move Buckshot made with pencil precision. She loved horses, but her mother feared them, once kicked and nearly broken, and forbade her from coming near. Jed knew. He let her be. Later, as he led Buckshot toward the fence, he called out without turning, "If you want riding lessons, better bring carrots next time. Buckshot doesn't work for free." Millie popped out, cheeks burning red. "Yes, sir. I'll bring a whole bunch." Jed laughed, his first real one in years. Something in her, the gleam, the eagerness, brought Waylon back for a moment. That evening, after Buckshot followed a full directional set without faltering, Jed raised one hand and stepped back. The horse froze, ears forward, waiting. Jed tilted his body left. Buckshot turned. No reins, no commands, just understanding. One circle, two. The horse moved around him like a moon around a planet. On the fence, Millie clapped softly, eyes wide. "You don't need to ride him," she whispered. "He's already carrying your soul." Jed looked at Buckshot. "I don't need a racehorse," he said. "I need a friend to run beside me." Buckshot approached, lowered his head. Jed placed a hand on his brow. And in that silence, there was no wind, no past, no pain, just the heartbeat of two spirits the world once left behind. South of Jackson Hole, where clear creeks carve through the land and power lines run parallel to the Tetons, stands Ravenhold Estate, the Van Holt family's domain. It looks like a ranch on the surface, but underneath, it's a machine, a precision-engineered factory for producing racehorses with zero room for emotion or error. At the center of that machine stood Ravenhold, the jet-black stallion sculpted like marble. His stall was paved with polished granite. The temperature was controlled by sensors. He was fed by milligram, massaged by Swiss hydraulic equipment, and trained on a treadmill that measured incline, heart rate, and breath count. Rider Van Holt watched from behind bulletproof glass, arms crossed. His gaze never wavered as Ravenhold galloped at full throttle. Every hoofbeat landed like a stitch from a sewing machine. A vet took notes. A trainer tweaked settings. A tech monitored the breathing monitor. "Every centimeter perfect," Ryder murmured. Then the side door opened. A tall, older man entered, silver hair parted neatly, posture proud. Cecil Branner, a veteran trainer who'd worked with champions for over 40 years. Ryder had hired him as a nod to tradition, a legacy figurehead. But today, Cecil wasn't here to nod. "Ryder, we need to talk." Ryder didn't turn. His voice was steel. "Say it here. I don't have time." Cecil stared through the glass at Ravenhold. "Jed McCrae is not a man you should take lightly." Ryder chuckled and poured himself cold water from a crystal pitcher. "I'm not underestimating him. I'm giving him a chance to be remembered one last time." "Do you know why people still talk about McCrae?" Cecil asked, eyes narrowing. "Not because he won a lot, but because he reminded them that horses aren't tools. They're partners." Ryder downed the water and slammed the glass on the table. "A horse wins, it's brilliant. A horse loses, it's a lawn ornament. Emotion doesn't earn trophies." "Maybe not," Cecil replied. "But emotion's what makes people remember you, long after the trophies rust." They locked eyes. Then Cecil turned. "I won't be at the race, but I'll be watching. just to see if there's still a place in this world for something real. Meanwhile, back at Jed's ranch, training continued. Unlike Ravenhold's synthetic gym, this field had bumps, mud, rocks, and the unexpected sounds of nature, things that taught Buckshot to adapt, react, and trust his instincts. Jed's methods involved synchronized breathing, pivot and advanced drills, and open pattern galloping. No heart monitors. But he knew when Buckshot's pulse spiked, when hesitation crept in, when confidence returned. Only time and trust could teach that. Millie Jean kept coming every afternoon, with carrots, her sketchbook, and wide-eyed wonder, the kind only little girls with wild horse dreams could bring. One day, she showed up early with an old phone. I filmed some training. It looked really cool. I posted it, she mumbled. I called it The Last Horse Whisperer. Jed raised an eyebrow. You filmed me? Just a few days ago, but I didn't think it would go so big. How big? One night, over 200,000 views. Jed looked toward the horizon. Something stirred in him. Not fear, but memory. A familiar hum from the time when every step he took into the arena was watched by a nation. They're starting to remember, he said quietly. At Ravenhold, Ryder sat across from a journalist from Western Equestrian Digest, a high-end magazine for elite horse circles. They dined in a room paneled with red cedar under soft golden lights. Cabernet Sauvignon flowed from a private cellar. Have you seen the viral video? The reporter asked. The old man training with no tools, just body language? Ryder snorted. I train with results. He trains with memories. Still, the footage is stunning. Mist at sunrise, horse circling him like it's under a spell. Save the magic for Disney, Ryder cut in. On the track, only speed and control matter. Feelings can't be timed. The reporter fell silent, scribbling notes. Cecil sat in the corner. He put down his wine, stood, and said softly, Excuse me, I don't do dinners with sauce but no soul. Ryder didn't look up. That night, Jed stepped into the barn. The crescent moon hung overhead, sharp as a silver blade. Buckshot stood calm, not pacing, not jittery, just watching. Jed placed his palm on the horse's brow and exhaled deeply. They're laughing now. They always laugh, but tomorrow, they'll go quiet. Buckshot tapped the earth with one hoof, as if answering. The next morning, Millie's video passed 1 million views. Social feeds buzzed, some mocked, some cried, some placed bets. But one thing was clear. The name Jed McRae was no longer a memory. It was rising again, not by fame, but through the heartbeat of a man and a Mustang that carried the fire of the wild. Winds rolled down from Wind River Ridge, slicing through the yellowed grass and carrying the scent of pine wood, campfire smoke, and that eerie quiet that only comes before something big. In the dim evening light, Jed sat curled beside a small fire pit behind the cabin. He wore a thick, worn wool coat, cradled a cup of cold coffee in his hands, and stared into the flames like they were retelling his past with every flicker. Buckshot rested nearby, one leg tucked under, head settled against the earth. The horse was no longer on edge. No longer startled by shifting breezes or phantom noises. He knew where he was. He knew who was watching over him. And he knew, tomorrow, everything would change. Jed sat in silence for a long time. Sometimes his eyes flicked skyward toward the stars, glinting like Waylon's eyes in that old photo. A sigh escaped him. Not tired, not sad, just weightless. Like a man who knows he's standing at the final gate, and all that's left is to walk through it. Tomorrow ain't about winning, he whispered like a prayer. It's about making sure there's nothing left to regret. A soft creak came from the gate. Jed didn't turn. He already knew who it was. Millie Jean wore a baggy hoodie and a knit beanie, cradling something wrapped in a checkered scarf. She crept closer, eyes wide with guilt and excitement. You're not asleep? Nope, Jed replied, then smiled. And you? Mom's out cold. I snuck out the window. She sat beside him and held out the bundle. I brought you something. Jed took it and slowly unwrapped it. Inside was an old saddle, deep brown leather, hand-stitched, worn but sturdy. This, he paused, this was my dad's, Millie said. Handmade when he was young. Grandpa taught him. Grandma said he won a town race with it back in '86. Jed ran his fingers along the spine of the saddle, hand trembling slightly. I want you to use it tomorrow, Millie whispered. Because you made me believe some things can still be real, even outside phones and report cards. Jed didn't say anything. He squeezed her shoulder, then gently set the saddle beside him like it might break if he held it too long. Thank you, Millie. "Are you scared?" she asked after a long silence. Jed looked into the fire, then smiled. "Of course. Who isn't? But if you spend your whole life running from fear, you'll find out the only thing you really ran from was yourself." The next morning, at Ravenhold Estate, Ryder stood in a dressing room lined with silk wallpaper and soft gold light. On the table, a custom-fitted black riding suit from Italy and a pristine saddle, Spanish leather, gold stitching, Van Holt Dynasty logo embossed in bold relief. His assistant placed a hand on his shoulder. "Press is already setting up at the field, outlets from Denver, Salt Lake, that even a live stream crew." "Good," Ryder said, fastening his cufflinks. "Let them watch me write the final chapter." "Ravenhold's vitals check out? Every muscle is dialed in. I'm not worried." The assistant checked his phone, then hesitated. "The video of McRae and Buckshot, it's past 5 million views. People are calling them the most unexpected duo in America." Ryder smirked. "And tomorrow they'll be calling me the man who put a legend back in the ground." At the field outside town, a temporary racecourse had sprung up. White fences, bleachers, scoreboard borrowed from the state fairgrounds, media tents flapping in the wind. By sundown, dozens of trucks had circled the pasture. Locals, tourists, online fans from other states, they all showed up like it was the Super Bowl of the Wild West. "You think McRae'll really show?" a journalist asked. "If he doesn't, the legend dies," another replied. Back at the ranch, Jed brushed Buckshot down. Morning light spilled through the stable slats, glinting off the Mustang's burnished coat. Millie's father's saddle was secured in place, worn, honest, true. Jed wore no new gear, just his faded canvas shirt, sun-bleached jeans, beat-up boots, and that same old hat he'd worn for 20 years. Buckshot pawed the ground, eyes shining. He wasn't a wild beast anymore. He was a warrior, not because he was forced, but because he had chosen to be. "No one's expecting much from us, boy," Jed said, tightening the strap. "They don't think we'll win. They don't think we'll even make it to the line." He paused, pressed his forehead gently to the horses. "Which is why we'll do more than win." Buckshot tossed his head, his quiet promise. That evening, with the sun dipping behind the Tetons, a caravan rolled out from McRae Ranch. Just one old pickup. Buckshot in the trailer. Jed behind the wheel. Eyes forward, toward whatever waited beyond that finish line. Back at Ravenhold, Ryder stared out the window as flags were raised across the valley. "Tomorrow's mine," he muttered. "Tomorrow's mine," he muttered, "and he'll be the closing paragraph of a tired old story." But maybe he never understood. True legends don't end, they echo. Morgan's Bend, a sprawling grassland beneath the shadow of the Tetons, where wind always sang an ancient psalm, was alive like a county fair. Tents flapped in every direction. Cameras flashed. Faces lined the fences, some eager, some mocking, some simply curious. The white rail fences traced the racecourse like lines in a hymn book. No jumbotron, no flashing graphics, just a sand glass and the weight of human breath. A voice boomed from the main booth. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are 10 minutes away from the most anticipated race, Ravenhold, the undefeated champion, versus Buckshot, the forgotten Mustang from a fading ranch." The crowd roared. Cheers echoed for Ryder Van Holt, some fans waving like it was NFL Sunday. At the far end of the field, under the shade of an old cypress, Jed McRae's beat-up pickup rolled to a stop. He stepped out, opened the trailer gate, no handlers, just a soft pat on Buckshot's shoulder. "Come on, boy. They're waiting to see if we fall at the start." Buckshot stepped down slowly, each hoof deliberate, like he was feeling the earth. Morning sunlight lit up his copper coat, turning his mane to liquid fire. Heads turned, the crowd fell quiet for a moment. Someone whispered, "That's him, Jed McRae. Look at that saddle, antique as hell. But the horse, God, that thing's a monument." Across the field, Ryder emerged from the VIP pavilion in a black and gold riding suit, helmet glinting, boots polished to perfection. Ravenhold, coal-black, muscular, a sculpted storm, was led by 2 handlers. His saddle gleamed under the sun, the Van Holt Dynasty crest proud and shining. Ryder looked toward Jed and sneered. "Sure you don't want help holding the reins? Or have you forgotten how they work?" Jed didn't answer. He just glanced at Buckshot and gave a nod. The horse stepped up to the line on his own. A referee in a white Stetson raised the flag. 2 riders, 1 mile, no rails, no lanes. First across wins. Ryder winked. "Ready to be forgotten again, old man?" Jed didn't look at him. He murmured, They laughed when I walked in. Now they'll go quiet when you walk out. Bang! The starting gun cracked. Ravenhold shot forward like a cannonball, hooves pounding, dirt flying. Ryder leaned low, shouting commands. The crowd erupted. Wild. Buckshot held steady. No burst. No panic. Jed didn't shout, didn't whip. He leaned forward and whispered, "Easy now, boy. Let him chase ghosts." The crowd buzzed. What's he doing? Sunday stroll? He's gonna fall behind. But then, at halfway, Ravenhold stumbled. His ears dipped. Sweat glistened along his neck. Ryder whipped hard. The stallion screamed, lost rhythm, faltered. Behind him, Jed whispered, "Now fly, partner." Buckshot answered, not with rage but with trust. He surged, not wild but clean. Precise, no rope, no yell, just knowing. A streak of fire in the mist. Buckshot thundered across the meadow, closing the gap in seconds. Past wind, past cheers, past doubt. Ryder looked over his shoulder, panic creeping in. He yanked the reins, shouted, "Faster!" But Ravenhold flinched, stumbled, rear left hoof skidding. With one final stride, Buckshot leapt forward, overtaking at the 100-yard mark. The crowd gasped. Cameras zoomed in. "He's passing him!" Jed didn't celebrate. He placed a gentle hand on Buckshot's mane. "We didn't win because we were fastest, but because we never forgot what matters." And with that, Buckshot crossed the finish line. Silence. Then applause. Then a roar, so loud it shook the banners. People stood, shouted, cried. Behind them, Ryder froze, eyes wide. He tried to speak, but turned away, walking off the track alone. Ravenhold stood behind, breathing hard, confused. On the grandstand, Millie Jean wept into her hands. A 10-year-old boy shouted, "I want to be like him." A woman told her daughter, "That wasn't a race. That was a life lesson." Jed led Buckshot through the white gate. He didn't turn back, but behind him, the world was watching. As the evening sun dipped low over Morgan's Bend, the crowd had dispersed. The cheers had faded. The loudspeakers had gone quiet. The bleachers now sat empty, holding only shadows and echoes of what had just unfolded. But one figure still stood by the white fence, hand resting softly on the neck of a chestnut Mustang. Jedediah McCrae, the man forgotten by the world of horse racing, now whispered to the animal beside him as if to an old friend. There was no laurel wreath, no trophy. But in Buckshot's eyes, the world saw something far greater: trust. "You made them remember," Jed said softly, "not because we were the strongest, but because we never gave up." On the other side of the fence, Ryder Van Holt strode away without a word. His riding gear still clung to him, but his eyes were no longer proud. He left Ravenhold behind, now in the care of a handler, and disappeared into the departing crowd. Cecil Branner stood at the edge of the track, quiet, still. When Jed turned, their eyes met across the field. No words, just a nod, long enough, deep enough, a silent apology from one soul to another. "You haven't changed," Cecil finally smiled and turned back toward his old pickup. Jed began walking Buckshot toward the truck, slow and steady. Before he could reach it, a small whirlwind came racing through the grass. Millie Jean, breathless from running, arms wrapping around Buckshot's mane. "Will you teach me?" She looked up, eyes glowing with hope. Jed looked at her for a long time, then nodded. "You don't really teach horses," he said. "You just learn how to let them choose to walk beside you. If you're ready to learn that, then I ain't going anywhere." Millie smiled, a quiet kind, the kind that stays. Then a boy, maybe 10, stepped forward, awkwardly tugging his sleeves. I want to learn too, not to race, just to understand them, like you do." Another kid joined him, then more. A handful of teens, 7 or 8 in total. They lined up, eyes uncertain but hearts full. Jed sat on the trailer's step. No speeches, no grandeur. He pulled off his gloves, laid them across his knees, and looked at them all. "Each of y'all brought a question," he said. "I won't have answers tomorrow, but Buckshot might, if you're quiet enough to hear him." A reporter approached, mic in hand. "Mr. McCrae, will you return to the racing world? After today, everyone's wondering." Jed tipped his old hat, tapped it against his knee. "I never left. They just forgot I was still here." He didn't look at the camera, only at the horizon, where in the distance a small herd of wild Mustangs galloped freely across the ridge. Their silhouettes echoed everything Buckshot had once been and still was. A soft wind picked up, rustling the grass like waves. Jed turned to Millie. "You know," he said quietly, "they laughed when I walked into that arena with my old coat and a name nobody remembered. But now—" He glanced at Buckshot. "Now they're quiet. after watching you walk out. Millie pulled a worn leather notebook from her backpack, flipped it open, wrote a single line. A legend doesn't need a spotlight, only someone willing to listen. The final image was of two figures, one old, one young, leading a Mustang through the open grassland, the sun just touching the mountain's edge, their shadows stretching long across the earth. No music, no ovation, just the wind and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats full of freedom. If you've ever believed that some things are worth more than victory, let us know in the comments. Comment 0 if you've ever been underestimated, but kept going anyway. Comment 1 if you believe that forgotten souls are sometimes the greatest teachers. And don't forget to subscribe to True Animal Stories, because the next story might just remind you. Magic doesn't live in the spotlight, but in a heart that refuses to quit.